Hi, good afternoon. It's Dean from maverickstar Observatory. I know if you follow the Ice Age Farmer, Christian's already give you his verdict on this article. I just thought I wanted to read the article myself and give you my opinion, my scientific take on this matter. Before I do, I want to thank JBM, you know you are, for your support yesterday. And I've got to say that was a real pleasant surprise. Can't thank you enough. Just wish a few more people like you, Doug, Bob, Jen, Kathy, Susan would chip in, and it weren't always the same people. But nevertheless, I'm not taking nothing away from you, JBM. Amazing, and thank you. So, getting into this, avoiding a climate lockdown. Well, we've had a COVID-19 lockdown globally. Now there is talk of avoiding a climate lockdown to reduce CO2 emissions from people using cars, private cars, eating red meats, and burning up too much energy. I really don't know where the experts in these fields are getting their information that CO2 is a problem, because if you look into it, and you don't just have to take my word from this, I've been doing CO2 readings now for over 6 months, and even during, longer than 6 months, but even during the lockdown, when there was no travel by any aircraft around the world, shipping was at a reduced rate, nobody was going to work, there was very minimal combustion engines and things being used, and yet CO2 remained as high as it always has done. And let's face it, if we doubled CO2 today, and it is supposedly impossible for us to do that, but even if we was managing to do that, it wouldn't damage anything. If you took a CO2 reading right now in your living room, it's probably going to be around 1400 parts per million. So what they're telling us is when we go outside and the CO2 ranges between 400 and 450 parts per million, it's toxic. Please, who are these people and what is their real agenda? Is it just a stealth tax on the public globally? Because if that is the case, then before surely you tax any Western country for environmental taxes related to CO2, then you should be first speaking to countries like China, India and Pakistan, who are probably one of the world's largest outputters of CO2 alone. And it doesn't make no difference if we in the West cut our CO2 emissions to zero, just like those crazies want us to do so from rebellion extinction. It wouldn't stop these countries producing that. We've even heard their presidents of these countries when our people live as good a quality of life as what your people do in the West, then we'll consider turning the environment greener with regards to manufacturing. But up until then, it's not going to happen. It's a luxury that other countries just simply cannot afford to do, and it is pointless exercise in any case. Look, the CO2 bubble should have been popped a long time ago. We've seen CO2 levels continue to rise gradually, and they will stabilise at some point, but we are watching global temperatures decline. This is the same argument like somebody mentioned in one of the comment sections on a few of the videos that we've had about, it's okay you're watching volcanic activity above sea level, but there are thousands of volcanoes erupting below sea level. Is that just an assumption, or do you have the facts on underground volcanoes erupting? Because I think it's just an assumption. And you know what, I've got no time for assumptions. It's the same assumptions that we get from these people that want to change policies that affect us all, forcing people out of work, forcing people to go bankrupt and lose their homes through lies. Simple and plain put, lies. I have destroyed, Wikipedia's outtake on CO2 and climate, and we've seen how much of the manipulation has been done to remove important data within those charts, how they emit cold seasons that have happened in the past at the back of, a rise in CO2. What you have to realise is that the horse pulls the cart don't pull the horse, right? Climate temperatures drive CO2 levels. If you had a can of beer in your room and you put it in the fridge and cooled the temperature of the liquid down, the beer, and then opened the lid, you'd hardly get any bubbles come out of it. If you put that same can of beer next to the radiator for a little bit and just warmed it up modestly and then popped the ring on it, you would see that it would froth, probably spill over the sides of the can. And that is because, the same with the ocean temperatures. If you warm up the ocean temperatures, they can they release more CO2. If you cool them down, they absorb more CO2. Simple as that. We've got some crazy people in our world, and they're driving an agenda. And, obviously now they're moving from a COVID-19 lockdown to a climate lockdown. It's just getting ridiculous. We've had these laws recently imposed, supposedly by Europe, saying that we can only use a certain amount of watts vacuum cleaners and other utensils that we have around the house to cut CO2 emissions. Just isn't going to happen. How much more are we going to be complacent in allowing these world governments to dictate what some clown has told them and give them inaccurate information with regards to what is going on with CO2? It doesn't make a goddamn bit of difference if we put double the amount into the atmosphere. Only thing will happen is that we've seen from satellites over deserts, they're becoming more greener. Is that a bad thing? When we make an environment more greener, that encourages more species to move into that environment. I think we owe it to these species that if CO2 is, making the world a greener place, then we should be, by all means, pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere, because we have probably wiped out 1/3 in the last 10 years of the species on this planet. We've got scientists and professors all agreeing about CO2 now is nothing to worry about. It's not a problem. What people forget is that they don't, a lot of people just believe what these politicians tell them. Do a bit of research. There was a time on this planet where the atmosphere was that of just CO2. And it was the algae, the zooplankton life forms in the oceans that scrubbed that CO2 naturally out and then allowed, in part of that respiration, that conversion, it meant that there was oxygen being put into the atmosphere. And guess what? It weren't too long after that species were then coming out of the oceans onto land. And I don't know whether you believe in Darwinism or, that we arrived from original species in the oceans. Well, that's another argument, but there is nothing abnormal about having CO2 in the atmosphere, and you're not affected by the 1400 parts per million right now in your living room, yet that is 2/3 what you will not get in the outside your front door. So this is insane. The world is approaching a tipping point on climate change, when protecting the future of civilizations will require a dramatic intervention. Avoiding this scenario will require green economic transformation and thus radical overhaul of the corporate governance, finance policies and energy systems. Well, I do believe that perhaps there could be an overhaul of the governance, because right now it is poor, piss poor. And we're not getting anything back for our money, quite clearly. With all what's gone on with COVID-19, no one's going to be held accountable for the billions that they have said they've spent. But where have they spent this money? And who has benefited from it? We've seen a lot of private companies here in the UK get contracts for track and trace and things like that, when the better company would have been the NHS to handle this. They had all the facilities to do this. It should have been just passed over to them, and they should have been the ones that got the extra finance to make sure that these things came about. But at the end of the day, I think we're all in agreement here that this is just nothing but a common cold. Influenza. Have we ever had for influenza a vaccine that has cured it? I mean, my parents just had a flu jab, and guess what? They've got the flu. What is going on in this world? These flu jabs were not even in existence 30 years ago. Is it just so companies, I won't mention the name, but these big, pharmaceutical companies, is it just so that they get a regular contract? I will never take a flu vaccine. I will never take a vaccine for COVID-19. Even if I'm forced to, I won't take it by principle. You know what? I'm not going to take nothing that has been rushed through industry and all of a sudden, here we are. Here's your cure to this problem. We've got a vaccine. I don't think it's ever, first of all, going to come about. But even if it does, I still ain't going to take it. And you know what? That's a common agreement. There's a lot of people that just simply won't take it. You know, we've all heard about what happened in 1911 with the Spanish flu. All those people that took the vaccine, were dead of it. They died. Is that a coincidence? Did that vaccine help any of those people that took it? Not one. We don't know what will happen in 10 years' time as a result of taking that vaccine. You know, we've seen big mistakes in pharmaceutical industries. When I'll just mention one, shall I? A thalidomide was given to pregnant women to stop them having morning sickness, and it caused birth defects like crazy. Took years of fighting court cases to win the case. It was finally accepted that thalidomide was a result and cause of deformed children, and now it is no longer on the shelves to be purchased. What would have been better is if a little bit more scientific research had been conducted before they deformed thousands and thousands of children as a result of that vaccine. We could easily be here again. And let me tell you this, if they force vaccines on people, well, what will be your test? You could wipe out the whole of the civilization if you globally went about mandatory vaccines. You could wipe out quite easily the human race in 10 years' time. I don't think it's a good idea anyway, but we're slightly deviating here off the topic. The topic is CO2, and it shouldn't make any difference if we double it, and it certainly doesn't affect us if we breathe an environment with a little bit more CO2 in it. And right now, like I said, you've probably got 1,400 to 2,000 parts per million in your living room. You go on a train, that'll increase to probably 2,500 parts per million. You're still not going to pass out. This is one of the reasons we take CO2 readings and oxygen level readings, because I do believe that people that are not scientifically understanding about all these things think that because there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, they're going to choke. It's not the case. It was on the Earth Health at a Glance that we put up on the website now every Wednesday. It was one of the weeks where we've had the most atmospheric oxygen concentration that we've measured over the last 5 or 6 weeks. So there is a massive reservoir in our atmosphere of oxygen. No one's going to drop down dead. And certainly by breathing in a little bit more CO2 is not going to have any effects on you right now. By the way, do you feel dizzy right now? Just because you've got another 1,000 parts per million of what you would have if you went outside. That CO2 is being generated by you and your household members. So, there's nothing to worry about. I could take a CO2 reading in air, it'd still be 1,400 parts per million. I could also bring the atmospheric oxygen sensor in here, and guess what? The atmospheric oxygen concentration in this living room isn't going to dip as a result of the increase in CO2. It's still going to be at 21%. So, it just makes me wonder, though, guys. It just, it was a laughing point at one point. Now it's not. It's not even funny. You can't even laugh at these people. And you certainly, when they start talking about CO2 levels choking the planet, it's ridiculous. Just thought I'd give you my take on this, guys. Link down there if you want to help support our observatory. As always, you have a great day. Enjoy your weekend. Spend it with your loved ones. Have fun, and I will be back at some point. As always, bye for now.